I'd like to welcome Sarah Michael to our webinar this afternoon. Sarah Michael, she teaches in Ysgol Calon, Cymru, but based in Amsterdam, and she teaches psychology to a variety of schools within Powys and up in North Wales. So how are you, Sarah? Are you okay?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Good, excellent. So I'm just going to run through a few questions with you this afternoon about teaching online, live sessions, virtual learning, and it'd be great to hear about your experiences of teaching online. So the first question I'd like to ask you is, how long have you been teaching virtually through Ysgol?
Through Ysgol since mid-September when we launched the psychology A-level, so just a couple of months. And previously, only really once before through necessity, through the pandemic, obviously with lockdown, teaching Zoom classes for me here. And when I was teaching at Harrow in Bangkok and Bangkok flooded, we had to move online for a couple of months and teach virtually as well. In a year where actually we got some of the best grades ever. It was really interesting to see how quickly students adapted to it.
So obviously, since you're since September, then, so if we look at the Ysgol project itself, how has your teaching changed since providing live sessions to pupils in Powys and in North Wales?
I think it's been a learning curve. I think there's two parts of it. On the one hand, in terms of planning, nothing really has changed because you do exactly the same thing. You start with the learning objectives, what you want to achieve for that lesson, and then work backwards and figure out how to get there. And I think that's exactly the same. The outcomes are always going to have to be the same. In terms of my teaching style, again, it's been a learning curve. I think it was difficult at first with some technological problems and microphones, and camera, and so on. And what happened was, I think I went back to a state sort of similar to when I first started teaching 14 years ago, where I wanted to fill every moment, and it ended up becoming really didactic. So I'd spend hours preparing these big long PowerPoints, and I would essentially produce a lecture that was 2 hours long for some of the sessions, which was, it's hard for me, no doubt hard for the students to sit and pay attention. And I think as I've become more confident with the technology, it's definitely evolved in that I've just become much freer and more relaxed with it, and given more power to the students, really, and asked them to present different pieces of work. I think when you're teaching online, there's a real difference. I think in the classroom, even though we know that reward and punishment don't particularly work as teachers, we still rely on it quite a lot, even with sixth form. We might say, oh, I'm going to speak to your tutor or send a message home or something like that. And I think you can't do that virtually. And so you really have to, I think, respect your learners. It feels more like I would imagine adult education to be, because they have to be motivated and you have to trust that they're going to stay focused. So that for me has been it's been a good experience. I'm really asking them to put the work in and to find the intrinsic motivation rather than trying to push them. And to do that, I think I've spent more time. I might drop them an individual email, sort of to follow up on work that might be missing or work that's particularly good, because the dynamic is different compared to in a classroom. So I do think that is different. And I've learned some new tech skills, which I now use in the physical classroom too. So things like on OneNote, adding an audio note as feedback. All the research says it's so much more valuable to have verbal feedback than it is to have a written note, especially in my handwriting, which is not legible for anyone. And so, although I got excited at first about using the pen and adding notes on OneNote, actually to add a quick audio note is much quicker. I think more effective a lot of the time, so I can really explain a point. And now I do that for my physical classes too. If I set homework, I leave an audio note as feedback. So I think, yeah, there's a few things that I've taken over and now use in my physical lessons too.
Fantastic. So it's great to hear how you had to strip back your virtual teaching as such, really, and not fill those gaps and those silence during the lesson itself, because teaching virtually is different to teaching physically, where you feel that you have to fill in those gaps as such, really. But what you were saying there was you just have to trust your pupils, show them respect, and just by providing them the learning opportunities, you then are giving them the autonomy then to produce their work within their own settings. And also going back to your first point when it comes to planning, where you mentioned learning objectives. Again, that is no difference in planning a virtual session to a physical session.
No, I think you know, one thing that I've done maybe is just because for me, at least with the e-sgol sessions, that some of them are 2 hours long and it's a long time. So I think it's about almost planning, you know, chunks of learning rather than trying to make things fit exactly to a lesson time. Because again, we know that attention span isn't going to necessarily hold. So breaking up lessons, having a quizzes or a Kahoot or something like that actually allows the students to engage and be a bit fun as well, is really useful. So I think in terms of planning, that there are some things like that I might do. But yeah, generally flipping the lessons a little bit more as well and asking the students to do more of the prep before. So I'm learning as I go to try to make it smarter, I guess, for me too, in terms of planning, because I definitely fell into a trap of spending far too long planning at the beginning, and it was hard work.
You in our little conversation before this recording, you mentioned the SAMR model, and how you've adopted to use that model within your teaching. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that model?
Sure. So the SAMR model, I think I reflect on this quite a bit, because I think when I agreed to and I sort of started teaching the e-sgol program, I thought I'm going to redefine everything and teaching will be transformed. And I think it doesn't have to be, actually. I think a lot of what we do is just straight substitution. So where I might write on the whiteboard in a class or a smart board, when I'm teaching virtually, I've made really good use of the collaboration space. And arguably, actually, it's augmented, because I will write a prompt on the collaboration space and then the students can just populate that with their ideas. And that really works. And I think it's about, I guess for me, the SAMR model is also about trying to work smarter. So using things like Google Forms, which is integrated with Teams. I set the students a piece of work the other day to listen to a 30-minute podcast, which I'd quickly gone through, written a Google form and added the answer choices that it could be, short answers. And so it marked it all for me, which, you know, a little bit of effort in the planning there suddenly made it so much easier for me to see they'd done the work. I knew they had to listen to it. They couldn't get the answers from anywhere else. And the marks just were added already for me. So I think there's a few things like that where actually they told me they enjoyed it too. And suddenly you're not only substituting, but you're modifying slightly and sometimes flipping learning. And puzzle as well is good for that too. So I think it's been really good, and I definitely use more of the tools I've been using virtually, physically now too.
So it's great to hear that you are using them in Amsterdam and also virtually with the pupils in Powys and in North Wales. So there's another question here then. So regarding the e-sgol project itself and teaching virtually, did you have any hesitations prior to starting the actual sessions themselves? And if so, how did you overcome these? Basically, has anything gone wrong and how were these issues solved?
Yes, so many things have gone wrong. I think I was hesitant. I was hesitant about the technology, and it has been a tricky start because I think you mentioned I'm teaching across 4 sites, and so there's 4 classrooms popping up, and inevitably one of our sessions is at lunchtime, so it's background noise, and the microphones go in the cameras to work, and I think I was nervous because, you know, it was literally you start and you're teaching and you're responsible for that class. And I think I felt that I should be the master of all things to do with OneNote and Teams. And actually that software was totally new to me because I'm used to using Google Classroom and Zoom. And I think I made the mistake of thinking we always presume that teenagers are experts. And actually, what I've learned is that they're not, and they need just as much guidance too. And so it was kind of a learning curve for all of us. And so I think as I say at the beginning, I almost went overboard, and I had some worksheets that I imported into OneNote and set as a background. And I said to the students, as I'm going through these PowerPoints, you can fill in the worksheets too. And I was really delighted with this. And actually, it didn't really work because everyone likes to take notes differently. Everyone uses different formats, and exactly as it would be for a room full of teachers, you know, I think this sort of trying to force a response doesn't work. So I think I've overcome that by just relaxing more. And with the technology, if you cut out, you know, what I found is that the students are really great. So, you know, they'll send a message on Teams saying, Miss, just having a couple of technical problems, we're on our way. Students who haven't been able to be in have joined from home. And they are really proactive, and it's just about having a dialogue, I think. I think for me, I was also worried about getting to know the students, because obviously that's one of the enjoyable aspects of teaching for me, that you really get to know your class by the time you finished the year. And one of the best things I think I did was at the beginning of the year, I set them a task where they had to leave a Flipgrid video. And they just had to say a fun fact about themselves, why they wanted to study the subject. And that's been really helpful. Just small facts like, oh, this is a student who loves sports, or, you know, which we can refer back to, because you don't necessarily have the one-to-one chats that you might do at the end of a lesson, just catching a student quickly. So making sure that's open.
You've hit the nail on the head there with lots of little snippets and golden nuggets of ideas there on how to engage with the pupils, to motivate the pupils, and to have that mutual respect as well, which I think is vitally important when you are delivering sessions live over Teams or Google Classroom. Is that level of mutual respect. So like I mentioned, you've mentioned lots of little golden nuggets, top tips there. However, I'm going to finish off now by asking, what one top tip would you give to a teacher who's never taught virtually, never delivered a live streaming session, and may be delivering virtually for prolonged periods of time after in January in the spring term?
Don't worry. I've got so many top tips actually. Don't worry. I think maybe don't abandon pen and paper actually. You know, I think there's assumptions that we have to move online with everything, and for me again that was a concern, and you can't move online because the students will still be sitting the exams in person and having to write by hand. So I've done tasks, well, mini assessments where I've told them to shut the laptops and to write by hand and time, and then they just take a photo and upload it to Teams or OneNote. And so I think, and you can mark it easily like that. So I think it's the idea that not to be scared of technology, I suppose, but also not to go overboard with it. Don't establish routines that you can't keep up with. Don't establish unnecessary routines with technology where you're trying to dazzle. Just, you know, the learning outcomes, the objective is exactly the same as it would be in a classroom. And I think if everyone remembers that, and remembers that it's not the end of the world if it cuts off because the internet's bad, or, you know, there's a dog barking in the background, and actually it makes it more human, I think. You know, it's part of the experience. Oh, and finally, ask for feedback. I didn't realize until I asked my students to fill in a quick feedback form that I was going through information way too quickly. And when you're working online, it's hard to gauge because usually in a classroom, students might say, Miss, hang on a second. And they don't tend to do that as much. And so I realized that several students said to me, Miss, please slow down, when I actually asked them directly for feedback. And that's really helpful because you've got to be open to reflect
you
on how it's going.
So I'd like to just thank you once again, Sarah, for taking part in this event that we're hosting to the schools across Wales. Yeah, thank you once again, and I hope that your virtual learning journey continues to prosper over the coming months.
Thank you. I think if we try to see it as an opportunity rather than a chore, we'll get through it. And I think there is a lot to be learned from it, and a lot of ways to grow professionally. So yeah, I'm still very much on that journey, but I'll keep feeding back. But good luck to everyone, and thanks for having me today.